Hey everyone, Ivan here, and I'm here to give an update on the situation with the economic sanctions towards Russia. So, a couple of weeks ago, I believe it must have been, I launched a video here on this channel where I was describing the possibility of the economic sanctions or blockade actually hurting the West more than Russia. And I was pretty confident in my case back then, and that confidence has grown. It is now stronger than it has basically ever been. Because a couple of things have happened, very significant things have happened. First is that the ruble has been essentially backed by oil, and also that it has essentially been backed by gold. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into this, but the ruble has gone from being fiat money to being real money in a matter of a few days. And of course, you probably know that the US dollar, the euro, is all fiat money. It is a Ponzi scheme at the end of the day. I mean, those are strong words, but we we have currencies that are artificially being kept alive through all kinds of economic trickeries. So let's dive into this. I'm not going to do much of a production value here today. I'm just going to go through these tabs with you, and let's see. Can I find? I think it's over here. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So let's start with the Washington Post. For those of you who don't know, the Washington Post is highly partial, a partisan paper owned by Jeff Bezos and typically not to be trusted. And this is a very good example of how untrustable the Washington Post actually is. Because 3 weeks ago, more or less, well, I guess it's almost 4 weeks ago, it says March the 3rd here, how Putin tried and failed to protect the ruble from sanctions. Then we can read here some proud chest beating about how we punished Putin for his annexation of Crimea back in 2014, and is basically giving the impression that we are in the strong position here. So this is interesting. Russia's central bank has shifted away from U.S. and European currencies since 2014. And so you can see that the Chinese yuan wasn't present at all in 2014, and now it's highly present. The gold reserves have increased dramatically by 2.5, and the US dollar reserves are dramatically down, and the euro reserves are somewhat down. And so this supports the case that I made in the previous video that Russia has been preparing for this for quite a while. So this is the case that was made in some sort of drunken stupor of Western supremacy, I suppose, because I saw even back then that I was just not going to turn out this way. So let's see what Putin has done since then. First, let's cover how the ruble is being backed by oil and gas. He now wants unfriendly countries to pay for Russian gas in rubles. So why is that? Well, he doesn't want to support the currencies that are important to the countries that are his. Well, he doesn't actually even use the word enemy, but he's called some unfriendly countries. And in order to understand what countries they are, let's look at this map. I'm not sure if this is a perfect representation, but this is a map of the countries that have started sanctions against Russia. And you can see it's essentially the Western world with some some bits of yellow over here in Japan, South Korea, but it's the West. So all of Africa, all of Latin South America, pretty much all of Asia, all of the Middle East are not sanctioning Russia. So this, roughly speaking, is the countries that are considered unfriendly by Putin, those here in yellow, okay? So here we have an article from CBS News: Russia to bar people from a growing list of unfriendly nations as sanctions over Putin's Ukraine war bite. I don't even quite understand that headline. Yeah, they're talking about how the Russian air carriers have been banned from the airspace of the European Union. But let's go down here. Dalip Singh, the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economics, is the White House official largely credited with designing the sanctions that Putin himself has described as an economic blitzkrieg. Within 72 hours of Russia launching its invasion on February the 24th, the US and its allies kicked most Russian financial institutions out of SWIFT, the backbone of the global bank payment system. Then they froze the foreign bank accounts of dozens of Russian billionaires and began seizing their super yachts and other property. Interestingly, Putin has already said that, yeah, just take the property, because those oligarchs have already essentially defected to the West in his mind, which is very interesting, because they're in the West. They have all of their property in the West. So yeah, it seems to be an internal battle as well for the Russians. But Alfonsi said that the most dramatic strike was directed at the Central Bank of Russia, which was cut off from $300 billion it had stashed in American, European, and Asian banks, so the Russian government could pay its bills if it ever faced sanctions again. Okay, so it seems then that the West has Russia in a headlock here. It's like this is pretty serious stuff. But is it? Well, that's the question. Let's continue. This is a very interesting report from the Central Bank of Russia. Let's review it. Bank of Russia to buy gold in domestic market. In order to balance supply and demand in the domestic market of precious metals, the Bank of Russia will buy gold from credit institutions at a fixed price starting from 28th of March 2022. My understanding is what happened is that the central bank actually stopped buying gold in order to allow the citizens of Russia the opportunity to find a safe placement for their assets as the ruble was being attacked by the West. And now they consider that the citizens of Russia have had enough time to safeguard their assets, their wealth, using gold. And so Russia is about to start buying gold again, the central bank. The price will be 5,000 Russian rubles per 1 gram from 28th of March 2022 through 30th of June 2022. Well, who knows how long it's going to be. The established price level makes it possible to maintain a stable supply of gold and smooth functioning of the gold mining industry in the current year. After the period specified, the purchase price of gold can be adjusted taking into account the emerging balance of supply and demand in the domestic market. Now, I'm not going to pretend to fully understand this, but it seems to me that this is close to pegging the value of rubles to gold, or it is essentially doing that, which means that the ruble is becoming an actual currency again with actual value in the real world. It's not just an imaginary trust-based contract where you can create as much money as you want out of thin air. Although I don't fully understand the implications of this yet. But there's something very interesting happening here. As you know, Nixon in the 70s, he abolished the gold standard so that the US was unpegged from the gold. And of course, the speculation in the financial markets has run rampant since then, leading to the US dollar now being in a perilous condition and very, very close to collapsing indeed. So the central bank of Russia has done something here that is very, very interesting in my perception. Let's see here, a little piece from Market Watch here. Opinion: Russia just made a case for owning gold and nobody noticed. Well, I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration. We noticed. Um, so, yeah, here's the important part. Much more interesting was Zavalny's main point, even though it has been mostly overlooked. If other countries want to buy oil, gas, other resources, or anything else from Russia, he said, let them pay either in hard currency, and this is gold for us, or pay as it is convenient for us. This is the national currency. Now, to understand this, remember what I showed you just a few moments ago with that map and the idea of unfriendly countries. What this means is that you will not be able to buy oil, gas, or other natural resources such as grain from Russia if you are an unfriendly country unless you pay in either gold or, well, rubles. And all of the countries that have not decided to place sanctions on Russia, they can still continue paying in their respective currencies. This is a strategically brilliant chess move. Of course, Europe is being stubborn, don't want to do this because they realize that this will essentially mean that Europe backs the Russian currency, the ruble, and don't want to do that. And so instead, we may be looking at rising food prices and inflation, rising gas prices, which is exactly what I warned against. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand these things, I think. But we're in the West now, we're in this strange situation where all of the so-called experts seem to have lost their capacity to think. This happened throughout the whole of the pandemic, where just a handful of experts cared about the science, and the rest of them ended up into some sort of fear matrix mass formation psychosis, where the marching order was to follow the lie. And many people are still not aware that this lie has been fully exposed by now, but it has. And I think what we're faced with here now is that all of our experts in the medical, or very, very many of the medical experts, they failed to stay true to science and they failed to stay true to the Hippocratic Oath. Now we seem to be faced with a similar situation in which the economic experts, the financial experts here in the West, also don't understand very basic macroeconomics. And I'm not trained as an economist, but it's just pattern recognition. Of course, this was going to happen. But some people, thankfully, are speaking out. Let's see. Yeah, here we have a CNBC. It's rare to see something like this from CNBC, but it's a good thing. Washington's trigger-happy sanctions may push countries away from the dollar, says think tank. And of course, the US has been extremely trigger-happy with stinging economic measures, and central banks may decide to diversify their portfolio of foreign reserves instead of relying heavily on the US dollar, according to the co-director of the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security. Now, Putin already set the precedence for this, as we saw here in the Washington Post. He moved over a period of 7 years from having almost 40% of the financial reserves of Russia in US dollars to just 16.5%. And Now, the rest of the world that is not yellow on this map is likely to start doing the same thing, which obviously means that the US dollar is going to be dramatically weakened because there isn't nearly as much demand for it anymore. And it is en route to stop being a reserve currency. So, what is the result? What is the result? Well, here's the result. We entered the war on the 24th of February. Let's see, 81.31 rubles to the dollar. And then Washington Post wrote their article on the 3rd. Here was 111. And I'm sure by the 8th on or 7th, they were very happy in the Washington Post because it was at a whopping 150 per dollar. And now, less than a month later, it is on 82.28, which is almost exactly what it was at the point of the invasion in Ukraine, which is to say that Russia has already fielded this challenge to their economy and is winning. Okay. And this is hard for many to realize, I guess. But it is truly what is going on. So it's it's a challenging place that we're in right now, in that our experts are posturing as if we are in the strong position in the West, when basically the world is becoming less and less interested in our currencies. Russia has, or Putin has just stabilized the ruble, pegged it, or doing something very similar to pegging it to gold, and is also now backing it with oil and gas and even natural resources in general. The fiat currencies of the West, however, have literally no substance to them. I think we're fucked. Simple as that. And I don't know if our politicians, economists were too ignorant to understand this. I don't understand why, because I understood this and I'm not an economist. So how can actual economists not understand it? Was that the case? Was it ignorance? Or was it that, again, there is some kind of great reset process happening here to demolish the Western currencies to pave the way for central bank digital currencies? Now, it's interesting when I bring up this point, I've had people say maybe it's more complex than that. And they don't provide any details to what they're talking about. What is this complexity that you're talking about? I think the naivete around the level of corruption and malfeasance that's happening is at this point absolutely lethal, because it means that we won't have the capacity to actually navigate what is likely to come, which is that by the end of the year, or maybe sooner than that, I think the euro and the US dollar will have crashed and the ruble will be strong. And at that point, maybe the Western elites will try and fix this problem with these central bank digital currencies. But by then, hopefully, you will be a little bit more suspicious about anything that our so-called experts want to do in order to help you out. Because over the last couple of years, literally nothing they have done has worked. So how can this be ignorance at this point? Like even the lockdowns that were responsible for devastating the international economy and definitely the Western economy. There's now more than 10 million Italians living under the poverty line. Uh, these lockdowns, as the John Hopkins study revealed, had almost zero efficacy. And Anthony Fauci is still jumping around doing his sickening spiel, his psychopathic spiel that, oh, we don't know. There's no way we can know if these lockdowns really work. No, actually, there is a way we can know because the science, the actual science, says so that they didn't work. So, yeah, don't be naive about this. I think there's a time here or a need here for you to understand, just like for me, to understand what this means for you, and that any assets that we have stored in the US dollar and the euro, we may want to actually move it elsewhere because they're not stable anymore. They're not stable anymore without the backing of the international community buying oil and gas using the dollar is screwed. And in competition with the ruble that is backed as well by gold, the dollar is even more screwed. So even though it seems like the West is winning the propaganda war in Ukraine, it seems like Putin is winning the actual war in the economic sector. So I think we're in for a very interesting time. I'm hopeful that cryptocurrencies are going to be helpful, though I think it's time to buy more commodities here. So we have been thinking about this, and I'm not gonna, let me spare you any details as to our private economy, but I think some gold and silver in your portfolio to diversify away from fiat currencies that are close to collapsing would be wise. So I hope you have a great day. It's interesting times, certainly, and I'll speak to you again soon.